The New York Zoo was happy to have me
Where?
join them as a field
That when you want it done,
researcher
don't
studying
This.
don't click it.
biology, really, for the
When
first
I'm
time.
done.
Yeah, you do it
Ah,
when you
yeah,
finish.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I don't know if you're aware that 42%, well, the Amazon basin is the size of the 48 states. 42% is in protected areas. Most of those are actually protected. And 77% of the Amazon is still in standing forest. A lot of people, you all know differently, but a lot of the public thinks the Amazon's mostly gone, but it's actually mostly still there. And so that's an important detail. Next one. Let me go back one. That is, I should say one thing. There are, so 54% of all the standing forests is in protected areas. 54% of all the standing forests is in protected areas. And there are 75 airports in the Amazon basin that have regularly scheduled commercial jet flights. Even people traveling in the Amazon with me who paid a lot of money for a trip, I asked them to guess how many airports there are, and they'll guess 5. But in fact, it's 75. You can get to much of the Amazon in a commercial jet without having to charter planes. Next, please. And my initial interest in harnessing tourism to try to protect forest is the Munn Reserved Zone, which is that sort of maroon or burnt umber, whatever that color is that says Manu Lodge in the middle. That's 266,000 hectares. That was going to be for shooting animals and capturing animals for meat and skins. That was the official plan of the Peruvian government in 1980. And most of the best of the 13 lakes of the Manu River are actually in the reserve zone. And so after a lot of being very annoying and surveying the lakes, I convinced the government to put it in a tourism use for a while, and then eventually they annexed it to the national park. So in that particular case, someone's got to.
Will everyone please mute? Everyone please mute your microphones.
Antonio, ¿quién está haciendo eso? Ahora sí. No. Anyway, I'll just try to keep talking, but this is unfortunate. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Ernesto. Apparently, yeah. Using that kind of argument, even though tourism in Manu was not really, it grew. Next, please. And we developed ways to watch parrots at the clay licks. They eat the clay to detoxify their toxic seed diet. Floating blinds, which are like they're like big catamarans, and you could move them around, and you could put 20, 30, 40 people inside them watching the action from relatively close. Next, please. And so now it's become kind of an interesting but fairly small industry, but big enough that it still keeps large areas of the Peruvian Amazon and the southern Amazon safe and relevant because of these protected areas that have clay licks that guests will visit in significant numbers. Here on the bottom, you've got the peach-fronted parakeet, which I consider to be not one of the most spectacular parrots. I'll talk about that later, because there are 345 parrot species, of which 70 I think are unusually beautiful. So I'm just showing one of them there. Next, please. So we actually turned the macaw study into an excuse to create more protected areas. So in the end, the macaws were really the lever, even though they're not even mammals, because mammals are generally more exciting for a larger fraction of the people than our birds. But even so, macaws are almost like honorary mammals. And so we were able to harness the macaws to create new protected areas that are 1/6 the size of California, 1/3 the size of Florida, 4 times the size of Connecticut. You choose which part of the country you know the best. 15 million acres. And that doesn't make sense to be able to create that much protected area, leveraging parrots and wildlife, even when the tourism was still so incipient. Next, please. Once again, the macaws got themselves on the cover twice of Geographic, and Time Magazine said I was some kind of leader for the future. I think they were confused, but they can be wrong sometimes, right? Next, please.
Es un imbécil.
And so the article, photographed by Franz Lanting,
They
was
mention and let's see.
pretty exciting. And early on, we thought there were only one or two macaw clay licks. Turns out there are hundreds of them. Only maybe a few dozen are really large. And this is a bird that you'd think you had to wait for weeks in the canopy to get a picture like that flying under you. But in fact, this is a bird that, what I'm going to talk about today is saying that there's a whole continuum between birds flying in the wild, terrified of you at a distance, and birds that, Paulina, what are you doing? Okay, this bird was a second baby in the nest, and we learned that if we took it out, fed it, and released it when it was large enough to fly, that it did perfectly well, and comes back to visit for decades, forever, basically. Takes wild mates. It is a wild bird, but it still comes back to visit us if we give it some tasty snacks. So this photograph was taken by Franz standing flat-footed in front of one of the lodges as we just tossed these birds in front of him. And then they didn't want to come back after a few tosses because they really just wanted some snacks. But it's just interesting to show what you can accomplish if you're able to mix animal husbandry with conservation biology techniques, along with animal training techniques, along with tourism and media. It all comes together when you have macaws flying like this, close to a famous photographer. Next, please. And so here are some of the protected areas we created. Medidi Park is the size of New Jersey. It's just below the word Bolivia. It's an inverted Y, basically. And then the Tampopata Condamo is the size of Connecticut. That's just to the west of Medidi Park. Medidi Park starts at 19,000 feet and then goes down to 600 feet of elevation. So it has an amazing number of different kinds of ecosystems. Probably has the most species of any protected area in the world because of that great range, including tropical dry forest in rain shadow valleys and lowland tropical forest, lowland savannas, high Andean grasslands near the glaciers. So it's an amazing park, even greater altitudinal diversity than the parks, even the amazing parks in Peru like Tampopata and Manu. Next, please. And so here we are just doing basic studies of macaws. There's my wife, Mariana, and we were able to tell 500 different red and green macaws apart by their facial lines. Just like, I guess Dan Rubenstein and others have used the stripes on zebras and marks on the tails of whales and things. You can tell hundreds of macaws apart just by their feather lines. And this can be extended further, but we took it to that far, and that's as far as we've taken it. But you can actually do all the demography of a macaw population without seeing a single nest, because you can count how many babies come with the adults, and you can see who's married to whom. So there's a lot more to be done there, but we just took it as far as we could, but then moved on to more conservation-related things. Next, please. And of course, this is a shot from above from the clay lake in Tampopata. One, really still the only clay lake. Now they've moved downstream to another clay lake called the Chuncho. The three large species of macaws of the Amazon at the same clay lake. It's unusual. Normally it's the red and green or the scarlet, or red and greens and scarlets, but it's very rare to have a clay lake that also has blue and golds or blue and yellows. Next, please. Turn your sound up, or is the sound up?
The macaw's detailed knowledge of the forest tells them just where to go.
This is what I wanted to show you. You can keep rolling, but those macaws up close flying next to the camera, those macaws were the second babies that would normally starve. We raised them and trained them to fly next to the boat, and that's how we got those shots. So we're kind of mixing, once again, conservation rescue of the second baby and then animal training, and of course the filmmakers have a field day with that. They love that. Here's that kind of shot, hard to get otherwise, of course. But this is just to show the other parrots that use the clay licks. These are the mealy parrots, one of the largest of the Amazon species, one of the 27 or 28 Amazon species, one of the painted parakeet, one of the smaller, very fast ones that fly through the forest. Very hard to see them properly except at clay licks, frankly. And the macaws, and they all have it's very elaborate, the schedules. Oh, what? Jose Antonio is saying he cannot see the video? Can anyone else see the video?
I say you can share the video later. That's what I say.
Oh, share it. Yeah, okay, we share it later. Okay, fine. Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
This is just a clip from a longer show, but I guess the point is the clay licks have a lot of other species using them, up to 17, 18 different species of parrots. And these species of parrots do not make the cut. Later I'm going to talk about the 70 most beautiful parrots of the 345. These don't make the cut. Even though they're very beautiful, they don't make the cut as far as I'm concerned, being so beautiful that people who don't even like birds would like to photograph them as a work of art. And yet, of course, a lot of other people love them, think they're great, but the macaws definitely make the cut. They're on the list. And have we run the whole thing, basically? Did we stop in the middle? Paulina, can you hear me? Well, there's a schedule of parrots using the lick, and so you can actually have fun for many hours in the morning each day at these clay licks. And some of the clay licks are used by spider monkeys even. But I think probably you just go to the next slide. I think we've seen enough of that. Now we're on to, so basically we've harnessed macaws and parrots to create a lot of protected areas, and we've used all these different techniques from just pure observation of their biology in the wild to rescuing the second baby, which is used often in conservation biology to increase the output of nests, like Carl Jones has done so successfully with so many birds. Amazing work that Carl's done over the years. And but one of the probably the most difficult project I've ever done that tries to harness tourism to protect wildlife and forests is our harpy eagle project, where we guarantee you will see our harpy eagle adult-sized. It may be an adult-sized juvenile, or it may be an adult, at eye level with a green background. And this is for the photographers who love this stuff. And of course, it looks good on Instagram, right? And on TikTok. But this is the October issue of National Geographic, last October, a few months ago. And so go ahead, Paulie. So I'll just show you quickly, because maybe not all of you will see it, and you won't have time to bother to find it. Stop there. Guys, go back, please. Because the phase of the nesting cycle, I don't know if Scott can correct me, is there another one of the 10,800 birds in the world that has a 3-year nesting cycle? Is the Philippine eagle, or are there other birds like that?
Not that I know of. 2 years is what I say is the maximum in avian biology class, but there may be some albatrosses that have 3 years.
Okay, well, at any rate, the harpy is more or less a 3-year cycle. And the part of the cycle when you have a fluffy little youngster and the adult hanging around, typically the mother, is only really from hatching until maybe 7 or 8 weeks for some nests. In other nests, the mother will hang around a lot until the baby's 3 months old. They fledge at 5 months, but fledging for a harpy eagle means hopping out of the nest onto big branches in the tree. So the harpy eagle biologists call that branching. So they're branching, then they hop back into the nest. I guess that's fledged. But then at 6 or 7 months, they fly to the first tree next door, then they fly back again. And this goes on, and so they spend less and less time in the nest tree up until 18 months. And so they come back to the nest tree for less and less time per day, but they're there almost every day for the first, say, 8 or 9 or 10 months. You can be sure of seeing the adult-sized juveniles. So there are 2 windows that work for harpies. If I'd realized how hard this was going to be, I'm not sure I would have done it, because we've spent so much money trying to get a program that can actually work and be profitable so that it pays back some of the investment. But it's that first 3 months, and then there's a period of 3 to 5 months where there are 2 or 3 months where the nestling doesn't look like an adult eagle. It could be even some other kind of eagle. You can't really tell what it is until it's about 5 months old. And the parents aren't there very often. So it's not very useful, because people don't want to take a picture of an eagle that you can't even tell what species it is, and the adults aren't coming. But if you wait until they're 5 months old, then they're the size of their parents. So then we promise an adult-sized eagle. In fact, their wings and tails are longer than the adults, because they have training wheels. They need longer wing feathers and longer tail feathers when they're learning to fly and maneuver. Then in the subsequent molts, the wings and tail feathers are shorter. Is that true of other raptors too, Scott?
Not that I know of, but I think this is unique in the length of time they spend there. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know if it's true of the Philippine eagle too, but at any rate, so then I guess we'll will see the adult-sized juvenile for between 5 months and maybe 8 or 9 or 10 months. And then after that, we typically like to switch to another nest that is in a better stage. So initially, Everton Miranda, who just finished his doctorate in I don't know what you just said to me, Paulina, but I think we're still rolling. He thought that the nesting was year round, and that doesn't seem to be true. We're working at about 9 degrees south of the equator in the southern Amazon, mostly in northern Mato Grosso in Brazil, and almost all of the eggs hatch between January and April. It's not even throughout the year. At this point, it's clear. And unfortunately, that means that the youngster is perfect. You know, the average maximum number of youngsters who are tiny with their mother hanging around is going to be March and April, maybe into May. And that doesn't really coincide with the jaguar season, because the jaguars can be seen reliably in that part of Brazil and really only there and nowhere else in certain areas in the Pantanal between June and December. So there's a little bit, the phases are off a little bit. And so now we're starting to get guests who are coming in March and April just to do harpies and other Amazonian things, and are not going to the Pantanal then because it's too muddy often in the Pantanal then, and also the jaguars are hard to see then. So I was hoping that we could match it always with the harpies we could match with the jaguars, because people like to combine the two in one trip, but it doesn't work that well. But we do have adult-sized juveniles that we can offer in large numbers. So I wasn't sure initially when we started this in 2000. Well, I guaranteed harpies in 2015 to Joe Van Os photo safaris from Seattle, and that worked, but that was difficult. And then I met Everton at the end of 2016, and so we've been working for 17, 18, 19, 20, and now we're going into 21. And we now have 39 nests, all in an area about the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island. It's kind of a strip like that. And so we do have to drive a number of hours to get to some nests, but we always have nests that are more or less functional. We have a certain number of towers. You can roll it now more. You can go ahead. Thanks, Paulie. Yeah, so there's one of the towers that we use. That's a tower for really tough people and for BBC cameramen, because that does not have stairs inside it. So we were using elaborate techniques to pull them up safely using block and tackle with rope breaks and whatnot. That saves lots of money not having to put stairs inside the tower. That is the tower that was used, if you saw the Impact of Meat Production show on BBC, where we put the presenter, Liz Bonin, up in that nest. You can actually see the juvenile sitting there, I think, in the crotch of the tree there. This was shot by a drone by the photographer, but that tower is not much taller. It's not so much taller than the tree. It looks like it is, but it's not really. Although we made it double-decker in the end, because we had so many people that wanted that one nest that we had to make a second level. And so we had guests there. We actually had the juvenile harpy landed on the tower at one point when people were sitting there, and it was looking at people about a meter away. That was kind of amazing. It's just one more tree as far as it was concerned. So they get ridiculously tame. We have other towers that have stairs inside them and are very nice. So we have 2 or 3 towers we rotate seasonally at different nests. The BBC wanted this nest because they wanted the contrast between the deforestation next door at the cattle ranch and the patch of forest there. And there is some significant forest nearby, so we do not think that harpy nest will starve, or we think it can continue to reproduce in the future. I say that because we reached a deal with one landowner to feature his harpy nest. And it took us so long negotiating with him, but by the time we signed the deal, the juveniles had starved to death because there was not enough food in that small forest patch. He had cut a lot of forest. It was a little forest patch. The adults had not figured out how to eat armadillos yet, because harpies that have had a slower transition to having a mosaic of open and closed habitat learn how to eat armadillos. They're very, very good at it. They eat almost exclusively armadillos. But these harpies hadn't learned to do that yet, and so their juveniles starved to death, which we could have prevented by intervening and subsidizing it, but we got there too late, so that was very, very sad. Next, please. And of course, all the photographers want the harpy bringing in prey, because that's very dramatic. And so ironically, we can put a tower closer to a harpy nest. Oh, one thing I should say, the harpies in this part of Brazil are not scared of humans, because humans in that part of the Amazon don't hunt. They're all colonists who came in from southern Brazil, or they're the children of colonists that came in from southern Brazil in the 80s, the 90s, the 200, the 2000s. And so these are all Brazil nut collectors. And the Brazil nut collectors do not hunt in that part of the Amazon. And in fact, there are very large parts of Brazil where there is no hunting because there's no legal sport hunting in Brazil. There's no legal hunting in Brazil since 1967. Most people don't know that there's a country almost the size of a continent that has no legal hunting. And in this particular case, this patch of the Amazon has no indigenous peoples left, so it's bad luck for the indigenous people, that's for sure. But the colonists who are there have Italian and Portuguese and German last names, and many of them have very light skin, and so they know very little about the forest. Unfortunately, the Indians, of course, know a ton about the forest, but the colonists and their children who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and are Brazil nut collectors know almost nothing. One guy I'm working with, I call him Tarzan, he's amazing. But when I first started working with him, he's a Brazil nut collector, as well as he'd been a hunter, and he had worked a lot in different parts of, probably in wood also. He didn't even know there were two kinds of red macaws. He thought there was only one red macaw, which I thought was kind of scandalous, because all the Indian tribes know all the macaws apart very well. They have a specific name for each of the macaws. They may not know the tiny parrots that well, but they definitely know the macaws. So if you can actually get very close to, I'm getting a report from Everton right now about a new harpy nest while we're talking. You can get very close to these nests. You can put a tower if you wanted. You could put a tower at 15 meters from the nest, and the adults wouldn't care. You can put it at 20 meters, they don't care. You can put it at 10 meters, they don't care. But if you're that close, you cannot photograph the adult bringing in the food because you can't swing your big lens fast enough. So it's really better if you're back 25, 30 meters. And often we're at that distance, which is ridiculous to consider compared to the bald eagle in the US. The federal law, you're not allowed to get within 90 meters of a bald eagle nest, even though I doubt that the behavior of bald eagles would be any different if you were very careful about how you were to put a tower, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Next, please. And so here, I think is that an armadillo? That's an armadillo, in fact, yeah. Because that nest that we studied, that we featured for the geographic article, was the main nest we featured, was in an area that had a lot of gallery forest and had been deforested a long time ago, but or next to it for cattle ranches. But the area is stable. There will be no more deforestation. And there's a very long gallery forest that's about 600 meters wide that has spider monkeys and a number of other species of monkeys, which indicates there's really no hunting, because spider monkeys surviving in an area with so many people is amazing. And this is unique, once again, I think, to the Brazilian Amazon, that you can have areas that have things like spider monkeys, which normally would be go into the stew pot in countries like Peru or Bolivia, typically. So it's very hard to see them. Like, next, please. Next, please. Next, please. And is that actually a video? If that's a video, then roll it. I didn't realize it was a video. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, let's look at this. This is only 1 minute long. This is our new South Wild Amazon site. So we feature harp eagles guaranteed. There's the Juruena River, which is so beautiful. And the white-nosed bearded saki monkey, so strange. Woolly monkeys. I've never seen so many woolly monkeys in my life. And we just drive there from an airport, and we have 24-hour electricity from the electric grid. And the French government built the lodge for us. And here we have the things you can see in the Pantanal, and then at the very end you have 2 seconds of it's only 1 minute long, 2 seconds of the white whiskered spider monkey, which is also part of the Brazilian ecological. We guarantee ocelots, we guarantee tapirs, and oh yeah, we have a floating hotel there, but actually the jaguars walk by your room. You can see the jaguars walk by your room from the picture window. It's kind of interesting. The white whiskered spider monkey. That's what I wanted to show you. That white whiskered spider monkey at the end. That was filmed in the middle of a city of 150,000 people. The third largest city in the entire state of Mato Grosso is called Sinop, and it's a city that's soy built. It's a soy and agro industry center. There's a 50-hectare forest park in the middle of the city, surrounded by the city on 97% of the side. And there's one little strip of forest that goes out to the rest of the bigger Amazon forest. And so the white-whiskered spider monkeys hang around there and even come down and walk around among the people of the town on the edge of the park during the daytime. This is an endangered species. It's very hard to see in other parts of the southern Amazon where there's been hunting or where there are still indigenous people or mixed blood people who hunt. But here they are living in a park, a city park. It's like, I guess, things that happen in India, right? A city park in a city of 150,000. And I only heard about this, I think, a year ago. And I've been working there for years. I should have known about this. This must have been true for, 15, 20 years already. So there are amazing things we keep stumbling upon in Brazil in particular. Next, please. I think, okay. So, the question, it looks a little weird, that slide, but at any rate, the ocelot there, it's not a bird, but the ocelot, of course, we're guaranteeing it, and they come in about 80% of the evenings. One of four ocelots comes in, sits down, and tells us it's ready, and then our staff member goes out and puts little snacks on the back of vines. Then you can take pictures of the ocelot without seeing why it's there, even though there's no secret about why it's there. And so we're doing this for 7 years now. And I think we have at least an extra 1,000 bed nights at our lodge because we guarantee ocelots and no one else can guarantee. And we actually have multiple lights that shine on them. The cats don't care. They've learned that one spot is safe. We don't see them anywhere else. They don't approach us in the daytime or at night anywhere else except this one safe spot where they've learned. And we have up to 30 or 40 people sitting there on bleachers with their tripods photographing. Next, please. So here's the contrast that kind of brings this into focus. That we need to use more tools in our toolbox to make wildlife pay for wildlands and for their own survival. On the left is a shot of the Anhinga Trail in the entrance to the Everglades National Park. On the right, obviously, is Animal Kingdom in Orlando, one of the many Disney parks in Orlando. So you can go to to see amazing close-up views of birds, especially, and some alligators. But actually, last time I was there, I think I saw one alligator there. So I saw a little bit of stuff, but it's very nice. But in Animal Kingdom, in a normal year, not a pandemic year, you'll have 40, 50,000 people there. The same day, the Anhinga Trail will have 100 or 200 people there. And so, of course, I think national parks are missing the opportunity to really make the public excited. But I'm not talking about putting animals in cages in national parks. I don't want to see that happen. In fact, I don't think we have to change stuff in the parks, but things next to parks, private initiatives next to parks and other wildlands next to parks would be a way to bring the wildlife alive more than the Park Service is able to do typically. Next, please. So Massachusetts Audubon, this is a funny little story. One of our guests for wildlife viewing told us that in the Ipswich River Sanctuary, which is one of the most important reserves of Massachusetts Audubon, not far from Boston, the songbirds will land on your hands. You put your hand out with a little bit of sunflower seed, and 5 minutes later, you'll have 3, 4, 5 species of birds landing on your hand. And it's true. I went there a couple weeks later after I heard that, and it's captivating. But Massachusetts Audubon never mentions that you will have birds landing on your hand. They seem to be embarrassed by it. In fact, they have a sign that says, "Do not feed any wildlife." In fact, then they have a bird feeder right next to it, next to their headquarters, feeding the birds. So it seems a little bit confusing, if not schizophrenic, to be saying, "Don't feed the birds." Oh, we're going to feed the birds. Oh, but won't mention what's the most exciting thing about that reserve is that you can stand there and have red-winged blackbirds, red-bellied woodpeckers, titmice, chickadees, nuthatches all land on your hand very confidently. You have to stand quietly, but they land on your hand, take a seat, and go away and come back. It's kind of magical. I don't know why people don't do this more often. It seems to me it must be harmless fun, or maybe there's something wrong with that I'm not aware of. Next, please. The reason I mention this, and there are important birds there too, but I think this might be the most extreme example of rewilding that I'm aware of. Are you aware that the 26,000 hectares that is the flagship property of the And Beyond group, originally called Conservation Corporation Africa, they brought every one of the large animals in that they now have in the early 90s. It was a rundown cattle ranch that had no interesting animals to speak of. So they brought in almost every large animal you can imagine. Giraffes, hippos, buffaloes, lions, leopards, cheetahs. Did they bring in crocodiles, or were they already there? I don't know if they may have been. But anyway, they brought all these things in, trucked them in, flew them in, and rewilded this place. Essentially made it a huge wildlife theme park. But now, fast forward several decades, no one who goes there to their fancy lodges knows that this is a rewilded place. And in fact, now the entire place is owned by the black townships next door. And the white-owned lodges, luxury lodges, pay rent to the black townships. This is a way to get the local population, very supportive of what's going on there. It's kind of amazing. But anyway, and there are amazing birds there too. Next, please. And when people say, should we feed wildlife? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. The answer is often, well, what are the costs? What are the benefits? What are the pros? What's the cons? Each species is different. Each location is different. This particular location is the second largest national park in Brazil. Of the 68 parks, it's the second largest national park outside the Amazon. In this case, it's just slightly east of the Amazon in what's called Cerrado or Cerrado savanna woodlands, a much rarer habitat type than is wet tropical forest. And so the Hyacinth Valley Reserve is 4 square miles of, it's 2,500 acres owned by a former macaw trapper who has turned a conservationist. I flipped him back in the 1990s. And he owns 4 square miles of dry forest and guarantees the most amazing wildlife, including the famous nut-cracking capuchins that you must have seen on TV a fethe times. He told me about that. So the outside world first heard about it from me in National Geographic, but I mean, he's known about it for decades. And that the monkeys use special hammer rocks that are not common that they have to find and then bring to their anvil rocks, which are sandstone. And they crack these golf ball sized nuts with their anvil rocks. But at any rate, so Lorival owns the 4 square miles next to this national park, and he had created some amazing attractions next to the park, like I'm saying, private reserves next to the national park. And he came to me, so I had people complain that we were putting out nuts for the macaws so we could see them more easily. We were putting nuts out for the monkeys so that the monkeys had the nuts more at hand so they could do their cracking in front of us. Or that we started feeding maned wolves also there. So we guarantee maned wolves, the world's tallest wild canid, arguably one of the most elegant. We've been guaranteeing that since 2004. And every one of our guests has seen it, typically at 2 to 5 meters away in natural habitat. But when I've had people complain that we shouldn't be feeding any of these animals, we should try to see what we can just by walking around and driving around and not doing any modification. So then Lorival asked me at one point about 8 years ago or 9 years ago, I've been offered good money to sell my entire 4 square miles to a company that's going to incinerate everything and turn it into charcoal. Should I take the money? That would be the end of all of our conservation work, the end of our macaw show, the end of the wolves. He'd cash out, and that would be everything would be turned into charcoal. So I pleaded with him not to sell, and he did not. But I'm only able to send him maybe 50 or 80 people a year, and I'd like to send him 500. Because if I could send him 200, he'd be making more money than he ever made in trapping macaws. But at 50 people a year spending 4 nights, he's not making as much money as he made in his best years of trapping macaws. But he still doesn't go back because, first of all, what he's doing now is legal. But that kind of a trade-off between incinerate everything, or let's feed a few animals something that is perfectly good food for them anyway, and maybe be able to. I mean, that kind of trade-off. It seems obvious what the answer is, but being a purist would not be very helpful. I would have been looking at charcoal at this point. Next, please. So in this case, it's sort of a continuum between, it's totally wild in national parks where you can't do anything to make the wildlife easier to see. Everything's natural. NGOs and biologists love this. And a lot of the best wildlife is impossible to see or very hard to see. Think of jaguars, think of mountain lions, think of large macaws before in places where they're still hunting. Very, very hard to see large macaws well in, say, northern Peruvian Amazon, an enormous piece of rainforest. But try to see wild macaws up close in the rainforest within a 2 or 3 or 4 hour speedboat ride of Iquitos. Just try that and see how close you get. And whether you get a trophy photo that's worth showing to your friends for putting on your Instagram, you're not going to get it. And the other extreme is totally entertaining, with the animals in cages or they're released from cages, like the amazing macaw show at Animal Kingdom, which is definitely worth checking out. 3 sets of 30 macaws or 40 macaws of 4 or 5 species that come out and fly around for a couple minutes, circle around the guests, land for a moment, and then go back and disappear. So it's an amazing simulation of what you see if you go to, say, the big clay lakes in Peru. It's kind of what they reproduce that in Animal Kingdom. And it's an amazing show. But nevertheless, those birds are not wild. And the animals, and most of the animals in Animal Kingdom are in enclosures. I don't really think animals in zoos is the best model. We like to think that we have developed something that's like a zoo without bars, a zoo in the wild, where you can see animals so well doing natural behavior that it dwarfs anything you could see in a zoo. Next, please. So I would maintain that bird tourism is not even reaching 1% of its potential. But of course, I have a plan, like the senator from Massachusetts. Next, please. You have to be open to different solutions and different methods, and certainly if you start mixing it up and using all the different disciplines from conservation biology and animal husbandry, animal training, also set design, because you have to choose the area where you want to see the animals so it's not ugly, so you don't see anything that humans have done to the habitat. This kind of experience of the lorikeets, why don't you run the next one? See what happens. At any rate, key species from the bird world can produce amazing conservation results if you harness the power of their beauty. Even for people who don't care about birds, they would like to take pictures of a lot of these animals just because it's a spectacular thing to see, even if they don't like birds. So I worked on ant wrens and ant shrikes and greenlets and things like that I think are amazing, but because they are. But I guarantee you that most of the public doesn't even know what an ant wren is and would never pay. Well, most people would never pay a single dollar to see any ant wren. Let's put it that way. But these are the kind of birds that, when harnessed properly in the wild, can produce enormous payoffs. Next, please. And briefly, I want to mention that the osprey was gone from the British Isles until 1954. It was gone for something like 70 years because of hunting and egg collecting. You know, the Europeans had this weird thing of wanting to have an egg collection. I guess maybe you all are aware of that. If you're not, it's a strange thing that's more uniquely European. But the osprey finally recolonized in Scotland in 1954. They tried to keep it a secret. The conservation ornithologists tried to keep it a secret. They were worried that egg collectors would go up the tree and take the osprey egg for their collection, blow it out and put it in their collection. But it was impossible to keep the secret, so they ended up doing the opposite. They put armed guards basically and electric fences and protected the whole area and put photographic blinds so you could watch them. And they had 14,000 people come in the first 6 weeks when they opened. And they've had, I don't know how many, I think they've had a couple of million people visit since then. So it's just amazing. The osprey, I mean, ospreys are pretty common in Florida. You could probably, 5 minutes from class, you could probably go see them right now. So the osprey is an animal that would be very easy to work with and surely should be worked with more to make it more spectacularly predictable. Next, please. And this is amazing. I don't know how many of you know about the Currumbin Sanctuary in Australia, but roll this. This is roll the video. Is it a video?
This is your place. This is yours.
Paulina, is it a video? Does it roll? Yeah. This guy, 1947, he started putting some nectar out for the lorikeets because they were destroying his flowers, because he was growing flowers for beekeeping. But this diversionary feeding to get the lorikeets off of his flowers created a spectacle, an inadvertent spectacle, and people started paying to see the lorikeets eating the nectar. And now you fast forward to 2021. Well, at least in 2019, they had 600,000 visitors go to this. It's now a non-profit. It's been owned by a nature conservation organization in Queensland, Australia, and it grosses something like $12 million a year for conservation. That's an amazing story, and because they harness the beauty of the lorikeets. Next, please. And of course, when I discovered that the second baby macaws always starved to death, or almost always, then we rescued them and released them in the wild. We raised them in the wild. There's one of our animal husbandry experts, Alvaro, what's Alvaro's last name? At any rate, Alvaro is animal husbandry student in Lima, he went out there and he was the foster father for all these macaws he rescued from starvation, and they went wild. And then they came back, of course, and visited, and we didn't know they would come back forever, but the Indians in Munn taught me that if you raise macaws and let them go wild, they'll keep coming back forever to get snacks. So that's a trick I learned from the Indians. Next, please.
Mhm.
And so here we are going into the nests to check to see how the second baby is doing. Because initially, we're not sure what percentage of the second babies actually died, and if we could predict the ones that were going to die, and it was possible to predict. You could see them falling off of a growth curve, just as if you take your child to the pediatrician, you can see if your child's growing normally or is not on the growth curve, and then you realize there's a problem. Here, if it's not on the growth curve, you can pull it and raise it in the field and release it, and create a feeding frenzy for photographers. Next, please. And then we took this to a further extreme. You can see that little house in the lower right. That's a little viewing blind. It's not even a blind, it's just a viewing structure to keep you from getting wet in the rain. And that is an artificial macaw lick. Everything you see there was created from scratch. Those are scarlet macaws that were rescued from starvation and released. And then they took wild mates and brought friends and whatnot. And so now it's like a gigantic color spectacle created from zero. And this makes a lodge that's otherwise like too remote to make profit regularly, makes it maybe still squeak by, because we did experiments in ecotourism. We're too far out there. We went beyond where you can actually make any money and actually pay salaries. So this is an amazing thing. This kind of spectacle could be created much closer to cities now that we know how to do it. Next, please. And so this is the size of the floating blinds we have in front of clay licks. There's a clay lick in the Heath River. Next, please. Clay lick is that patch of clay on the right. Next, please. And of course, on my list of birds, of the 10,000 birds, all 6 flamingo species are considered spectacular among the star birds that could be harnessed. This is one that was rescued and has been raised by a veterinarian in Curacao, and she takes it to classes to do school programs and whatnot. So Bob the flamingo has been in National Geographic a number of times, but the interesting thing is, of the 6 flamingo species, there's almost nowhere where you can photograph them properly, and yet the same people that made TV shows with this figured out how to do a Fred Flintstone style floating blind that you can move with your feet. You can get very close to flamingo nests without bothering them, because they're very sensitive at their nest. You cannot scare the adults off the nest, or the baby will bake in the sun often. So flamingos, strangely, I mean, there are lots of places that have flamingos, but try to get a really good trophy photo of a flamingo at the moment. You can't do it unless you use the kind of techniques that Neil Williams used in the Yucatan. Next, please. But it would be possible to industrialize that, really. You know. So, I mean, the question is, do we just study these things? And studying is superb, you know. Are we worried about the fact that studying things that are going to go extinct in front of our eyes? It seems like we have to use what we've learned, use our scientific knowledge to inform better and more and cleverer tourism that's conservation oriented, to really make wild areas pay for themselves, pay for their protection. Next, please. Because otherwise we'll end up, I mean, you know, this is the future. This is actually the present in California and Australia, parts of Chile, now that the dry seasons are so terrible, as we all know. And of course, last year, about 30% of the Pantanal is half the size of California. And so it's bigger than, the Pantanal is about the size of Florida, in fact. And 30% of it burned last year because of the extra dry and extended dry season, which we don't think is an accident, that it's getting drier. That's what the climate models predicted 10, 15 years ago, that a lot of South America would become drier and drier. And I hope it's not happening. I hope that was just an aberrant year. But we definitely have to do everything we can to make wilderness worth as much as possible. Next, please. And so there's a continuum between wild animals in cages and totally wild animals that are terrified of you. And we have to look at some compromise. And if you look at, let's look at the ocelot, for instance. The ocelots will be guaranteed by giving them snacks hidden in the back of the vines. And you're watching them from 5 to 9 meters, you know, so it's quite close, well lit. The ocelots those ocelots surely have a slightly higher average body weight, maybe even in the lean season. They're youngsters, they're young probably, the kittens probably survive, the cubs survive better because the mother is not so stressed, because you can always rely on getting a little bit of subsidy, although they don't come in every evening. It's not a zoo. We can't tell the ocelots to show up. They show up if they feel like it. They only spend a few minutes there, and then they spend the rest of their, they spend 20 minutes there every few days, and then they spend the rest of the 24 hours doing other things. So yes, that would not be the perfect place to study ocelot ecology, because I'm sure we're modifying their habitat, their territory use a little bit, their movements, their body weight, their survival. All those things would not be completely natural. But how many ocelots have died already thanks to our destroying their habitat or shooting them? And so if a few ocelots have a slightly easier life, yeah, it's not a perfectly natural situation. But on the other hand, I might be able to save some part of the Pantanal for real, because the tourism still has not really pulled its weight in the Pantanal. If tourism is protecting more than 2% of the Pantanal, I would be surprised at this point. And we'd have to get into the point where my goal in the Pantanal is that 50% of the Pantanal, the jaguars are happy because all the ranchers are not shooting them anymore, because between having electric fences around the maternity fields where the heifers are giving birth, and keeping them away from the forest where the jaguars are, and also having compensation that's paid to the ranchers for cattle that are killed by the jaguars, because jaguars definitely kill cattle. Some of them do quite a bit, some of them do a lot less, but there has to be a compensation scheme that harnesses funding from the tourism, and it should be possible. We are working on a new program exactly along those lines, where the jaguar tourism will fund protection of the jaguars by paying for dead cows that are verifiably killed by jaguars, which our own team can go out and verify. We don't have to rely on the rancher to tell us that the cow that died because it got stuck in the mud was killed by a jaguar. We're not going to pay for cows that die from other things. But we think we just have to mix it up a lot more, and harnessing the approximately 600 bird species that are so beautiful that even people who don't like birds would like to photograph them. I made a list of them, and we can argue about them later. But for instance, I said for the parrots, 345 species, 70 of them are unusually spectacularly beautiful as a work of art, as just color, spectacle. And most of those are actually in eastern Indonesia and Australia. They're not even from Latin America. The macaws are on the list, and the golden parakeet is on the list, the sun parakeet, and a few others. But it's mostly macaws who would make the list in the Americas. It's like 28 species of the 70 are from the Americas, and all the rest are from eastern Indonesia and Australia, and maybe 1 or 2 from Africa or Asia. But Africa and Asia are parrot poor, as you probably realize. The 2 big areas that have parrots are eastern Indonesia, east of the Wallace Line, Australia, and Latin America. But is there something else, or another slide? Or I don't remember. There's another slide. Oh. Why are we talking about that? Oh, I see. Yeah. New Jersey passed a wild bird bill, which means you cannot import exotic birds into New Jersey. But that was in 1992 or something. The bill got out of committee because I was working for the New York Zoo, and I was based nearby, and I was able to drive down to Trenton, the capital of New Jersey, and give testimony in the Environment Committee. And the bill got out of committee and was voted in and became law. And then following that, there already was a New York State law like that, and then the New Jersey law, and then it became a national law soon after that. So we've harnessed the love of parrots to stop their importation, their capture and importation, and even got the attention of Alec Baldwin, who's a friend of mine now, who calls me from time to time, and we do stuff together. He did a show with us called Black Market Birds for TBS. He donated his time, so did his wife at the time, Kim Basinger, because obviously the budget would have been all consumed by just paying them even for a few days of work, but they donated their time. And now it's time to have him go see some amazing things in the U.S. I think the U.S. is actually behind Brazil in terms of harnessing the biodiversity to create jobs, the way I'm discussing. Go ahead. Is there another slide, or is that it? Is that the works, I think? I think it's the same old thing. Why don't you unmute yourself, Polly, so you can tell me whether we're actually done?
Oh, yeah, that's all the slides for now, but we do have questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, then what would you like me to do next? Scott, what would you like me to do?
Thank you very much, Charlie. And I think it's time to start doing some questions about this.
Where's the send?
Let's see, Lisa, looks like there's a chat from Lisa, basically, the large numbers of birds, as another, if you thought, to what extent of your ideas involving trying to get enormous numbers of birds as well as.
I love it. I mean, Lisa's completely correct. Black skimmers are stunning, and even people who don't like birds would like to see them doing their thing. And absolutely, yeah. They're. I mean, the guano islands of Peru. I think I forgot really to mention them. So the cormorants would be added in there. But I don't know. The list goes on and on. But it seems to me create a lot of jobs for bird scientists doing these kinds of things systematically, instead of having to go teach high school biology or something, which I'm not opposed to. That's great, but it would be nice to be able to be in the field a lot as well. I don't know if there's another.
Yeah, there's another question.
Charlie, I have a comment on your dichotomizing the contrast between birds in the full wild that are mostly terrified of humans and keep their distance whenever they see us, and birds in a captive environment where they can be enticed to land on your finger and eat treats. And but that is, I think, partly an artifact of long history of hunting that has frightened birds and mammals and all sorts of things to be terribly afraid of humans. And I don't understand fully the genetics of that behavior, because these same birds and mammals are not afraid of cows or other great big things, but they're definitely afraid of humans. But my sense is that is breaking down. And you gave the example of the birds in New England that'll come to your hen to eat on sunflower seeds. Well, I've experienced that with Kia parrots in New Zealand, and you talk about the rainbow lorikeets in Australia. And now we're seeing this in Cedar Key, where people by and large ignore birds. They're just present, and the birds are getting more and more used to it. And so boat-tailed grackles will come up, gulls will come up, but pelicans come up and beg you. And even now there's a couple of egrets that great egrets that spend their life just hanging out right beside fishermen, hoping that they'll get some leftover bait or some other kinds of tidbits. And the egret, you can find it in the middle of the street or walking down the sidewalk in the very center of town, completely unafraid of humans. And so I think this is the coming future. And as long as people can refrain from hunting and otherwise directly harming wildlife, it will become tamer and tamer. And so, well, just your thoughts on that.
What are my thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's amazing, and I have seen some of those things in Florida, as you say. But I think organizing something to make it more beautiful is a little bit like flower arranging. Okay, so at this point you have these tame animals, but if you have them in a beautiful setting where there's no sign that humans exist, even if behind you there's all signs that humans exist, it allows you to create this fiction that nature is beautiful in and of itself. It's a false. It's a trompe l'oeil, it's a trick, but I mean, our rule is not to have anything in your photo angle that would indicate that humans exist on the planet. That's our model. And so those things you're talking about are spectacular. I would like to then tweak them or adjust them so that I can get them with a beautiful setting, so I can take a picture and put it on my Instagram and amaze people. Where did you get that?
Yeah, well, I'm all for you, Charlie. You're doing great things, so keep it up.
I'm working on bears and bobcats now in Connecticut. But anyway.
Yeah, I know you're working on bears. I'd like to hear about it, but not now.
Yeah, no. The bobcat we see 80% of the evenings at 2 meters.
You
Anyway.
sent it.
Okay, here are two
We
questions.
see it in our backyard here too, not that way.
So how is there are questions from the chat. How has COVID-19 affected long-term viability of your sites?
Oh, I mean, yeah, everything is shut down. So we have been relying on some deposits for 2021 and 2022. It's been tough. Absolutely, it's been tough. But of course, mixing it up and doing it in different countries is part of the solution, because I'm working in Chile also. So Chile is doing very well in vaccination, and they're by far the leaders in Latin America. Of a big country. There are some Caribbean nations that are they're very small. They're doing very well also. But as far as kind of a big country, Chile is up around 20% vaccinated now, and they're just going great guns because they're organized. And so Chile will open, and I have people depositing and paying me for trips to Chile that are helping me, because Brazil's going to be a little slower. Peru's going to be slower still. Working in the U.S. is, I mean, when I was a young biologist, there was none of these animals I'm working with in the U.S. now were really possible to see. It's an incredible recovery of a lot of animals in parts of the U.S. that kind of snuck up on me while I was working in Latin America. And now there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the U.S. And I think like I say, the national parks and state parks are they have to play catch-up baseball, because they haven't thought of any ways to harness this more specifically, to create more income for their conservation work, or to buy more lands or anything. But so working in the U.S. is also an option, because if you're in parts of the U.S. where you can drive a couple hours from a big city and see some amazing birds or mammals that you never thought you could see, then that gives me another option. So I'm glad to be working in several countries, to answer your question. We've taken a hit in all of our Latin American sites especially, and we had to take on some extra debt really during this year to survive, so our team members don't starve to death, basically waiting for tourism to recover. So it's been bad, but mixing it up with different countries is the best way to solve that, I think.
Charlie, can I just ask a follow-up to that? Well, first I want to say what you said about the United States is interesting. And so I'm living in Texas, and we don't have a lot of public land here. So one interesting thing you may be aware of is that there are these photography ranches that open where people take private land and they invest a lot in bird blinds and other things, so you can get close to peccaries and all these tropical birds we have in South Texas. So that feels kind of like a uniquely Texas thing, given our limitations on seeing nature in other ways. To follow up with COVID-19 real fast, are you seeing any damage to your sites, or are you worried though that there are going to be compromises to the integrity of these areas? Like you mentioned your friend who was debating selling his land to be developed. Now he's got a year with no income. Are you worried that a guy like that might be selling this year?
Yes, I am worried, specifically about him. But I have no indication. I don't know how he's surviving exactly. I mean, I talk to him often, but I haven't. I know he has a little bit of cattle here and there, and he has a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I don't think he's gone back to black market trading, because there's also no trade anymore, really. The bird trade has been stamped out in Brazil. So I'm worried about him more than most other sites. Most other sites, they have some way to scrape by, or we've been giving them sort of minimum wage at least, so they can get by while we're waiting for things to reactivate. But yeah, I am worried. Other parts of the world I'm worried about. The areas I work in, we've made sure that we keep enough funding going that nothing's really backslid. But it's interesting. I'll have to ask Lori about how exactly he's surviving.
Thanks.
We should talk about Texas sometime. I'm very interested in Texas, specific things in Texas. We can talk about that some other time.
Here's another question from the chat bot. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
Oh yeah,
Dr. I.
Ian, are you gonna be able to ask?
hi.
We're still getting the echo chamber.
You can type the question too.
Sorry, that was my fault. There were two bugs with the computer on at the same time, and which never works. That was my fault. I apologize. Yeah, I was curious. It was really interesting, an entirely different perspective on this kind of conservation issues. But I spent a lot of time in the American West, North American West, and coyotes and grizzly bears are a big issue there, right? Because if you feed them, they will become a problem. And there's a saying now that the National Forest Service, the Park Service tells you, a fed bear is a dead bear, right? And I'm just curious how you, and like people who study human dimensions of wildlife, think about these things. I'm not being, I thought what you were talking about was really interesting, really compelling. I'm just curious how you about what animals to do this with, because there are certain animals that they do pose a bigger problem once they've been fed. You see what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to choose the species that you're working with, and look at the specific risks and dangers. Yeah, I mean, we should talk about that later because you're talking about mammals, and I'm happy to talk about it quite a bit. But I don't think we should use up a bird thing talking about it. But yeah, I mean, there are ways. Coyotes, I'm not even sure people want to see them. Do people want to see coyotes? I don't sense there's a market interest really much.
I guess all I mean is like one thing you tell students and tell the public is not to feed wildlife, because a lot of wildlife becomes dangerous, and maybe that's too much of a generalization when people say that, but there is that message being put out there to a certain extent. And again, I'm not being critical of what you've done. I'm just curious how you balance the different messaging going on, when it's useful to feed wildlife to help conservation, when it's actually detrimental to wildlife.
Let me engage with you later about this, because
Okay.
I've thought a lot about it. This is not the first time I've heard this.
No, I'm sure, yeah.
But I've thought a lot about it, and I do have some general rules, But I mean, if feeding an animal will produce an enormous net gain in conservation, and you can't see the animal otherwise without providing it with some nutritious snack, then it's worth considering doing. Then it's a question of whether you feed it in such a way that the animal associates you with the food. You can break the link. There's no reason the animal has to associate you with the food. That's the short answer to your question. The idiots that hand feed bears and stuff, that's just idiotic. You may be able to get away with it, but it's a bad model. But we can talk about that later, though, I think. Does that make any sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
There are quite a few questions in the chat. Let's see, how the Brazilian government policies impacted your sites.
Well, oddly, the Brazilian government laws are pretty good as far as conservation goes. It's just the current president who's been a problem, and the current minister of environment, if you could even call him that. So those two guys are the main problem, I'd say, at the moment. The laws in Brazil are pretty good, actually. I mean, they're imperfect in some ways. What I think is interesting is South Africa, where you actually own the wildlife that's on your land. It's one of the few countries where you actually own the wildlife. And you can, if you can prove you have enough of something, you can catch some and sell it to someone else who wants to put it on her or his land. But in Brazil, it's like the U.S. and most countries where the wildlife is all owned by the state. But Brazilians have been remarkably flexible, I think, in some ways, to let us try different models.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that there's also, it's complicated working in Brazil for other reasons, but they've been pretty flexible about this. The Chileans have been actually, I think, more stubborn in some ways, and in other ways not. But
They're going to put me away.
I would say no. For the most part, the odd thing is when you deforest a lot, as long as you don't go beyond a certain threshold, I forget what it is. Is it 75% of forest left or 50%? I think when you go below 50% forest in a matrix of what used to be pure forest, the harp eagles will not be able to reproduce very well anymore. They simply don't have enough prey, or they haven't learned how to switch to armadillos. We see that, if it's above 50%, there's a reasonable chance that harpies can survive. And in fact, you have tapirs walking around in small cities and towns. You have tapirs that are very easy to see in places in Brazil. So actually, I found the lack of hunting in Brazil, which is what John said originally. I completely agree. The lack of hunting in Brazil is something that just surprised me, because I wasn't expecting what was going to happen. But large animals are are easy to see, just like John's talking about in Florida now. And so I would say, for the most part, working in Brazil, it's like a paradise as far as wildlife, because in fact, Brazilian sportsmen, there's no sport hunting, and Brazilian sportsmen put all their sport energy into fishing. And Brazilian sports fishermen are very respectful of wildlife. They like it. They think it's fun. You can even have there was a hyacinth macaw nesting in a tree that had the cavity was so close to the ground, it went all the way down through the ground. There was a small window at the bottom, the natural hole, and the macaw was 3 feet off the ground. And you could stick your hand in almost. It would try to bite your finger, but it wouldn't fly. It wouldn't go up and fly away because it realized that this is in the middle of a fishing camp of people who are, I'd say middle class and lower middle class guys from Goiás or from Goiânia who were coming in a bus. There'd be like 40 of them in a bus. They put up their tents there. These guys don't have a lot of money, but they love their sport fishing, and they're all respectful of the macaw. I could no more imagine that in Peru or Bolivia or Ecuador. I mean, it was incredible. So, I mean, I take my hat off to the Brazilians.
Hey, another question is, are you ever planning to come back to Peru?
Oh, yeah, I love to work in Peru. I mean, we still have projects in Peru, but at the moment, I'm just so captivated by what we've stumbled upon in Brazil and Chile. I mean, walking with mountain lions. Who could think you could walk with mountain lions while they're hunting in front of you? So, I mean, and I love the birds, but the big cats galvanize the imagination of a lot larger fraction of the public than do the birds. I still like the birds more than the cats, but the market has spoken. I can protect more birds with the cat than I can vice versa.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Charlie.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Charlie.
Let's see. Do you think long-term expansion of public interest in ecotourism would increase opportunities for unethical treatment of animals under the guise of sustainability?
There's definitely that risk. There's definitely the risk that for every operator who's doing something ethical and sustainable and yet is modifying wild animal behavior, there definitely will be people who will do stuff the wrong way. There's no question that we'd have to be vigilant. But the public's pretty good at spotting those things. And now with the internet, it's pretty fast to come down hard on someone who's doing something really wrong.
Okay. Do you incorporate other forms of outreach, such as YouTube at your sites, could help with finances until tourism picks up? Fundraise?
Are there other ways to raise funds to get through this crisis? Is that what the question was?
Yeah, just like YouTube or
well, I don't think that would be an efficient use of my time, but maybe other people would be good at that. But I mean, I have a lot of interest from a lot of our repeat guests and repeat agencies, including for some new sites we've discovered. So we're pretty busy preparing for things to reopen. And as I say, Chile is already reopening. So and the way the Chileans are going, they'll be in good shape. Start in July and August, they'll be in good shape already. And the big tour season in Chile is not until October, November, December. So I don't think that would be a good use of my time, but some other people definitely could use that in some sites, but I don't think it would be the best use of my time.
Okay, let's see. Do you think a well-regulated hunting program such as we have in the U.S. could ever exist in Brazil? Is Brazil missing out on conservation funding by not allowing any hunting at all?
Probably they are, because they probably could hunt peccaries up to a certain point at least. They certainly could hunt all of the wild boar, which are not even from Brazil anyway. They could hunt all the water buffalo. And they actually make it fairly hard to hunt even water buffalo, even though they're introduced and becoming a bit of a problem, frankly, in parts of the Pantanal. So, yeah, I mean, the sort of blanket ban is not necessarily very logical. If you banned the hunting of white-tailed deer, there would be no understory left in any forest in North America. So, unless you reintroduced the predators, and that's not going to happen easily, right? So, I see that in my forest in Maryland. I have a forest in Maryland that has no understory below 5 or 6 feet. It's got so many deer, And I ask people to hunt on my land. I only have 50 acres, but it's got meter thick oak trees. But the deer around are scrawny, and there's so many of them because they're obviously eating everything that there is to eat. I see a herd of 150 white-tailed deer in a field 5 minutes from my house. That's a lot of deer as far as, it looks like Africa or something. And so no, I think the Brazilians should consider certain species. Yeah, they should consider it for sure.
And see, how have other ecotourism entrepreneurs like Rainforest Expeditions can be so successful without any feeding of animals?
Well, they've done an amazing job. The hero of the National Geographic piece, I think he's, are you there, Eduardo? I think Eduardo's, nice to see you.
This is his question.
Why have they been so successful? I would say they would have been more successful even had they done some of these techniques. I guess that would be my answer. They'd have 10 lodges instead of 3. They'd be protecting millions of hectares instead of 500,000 hectares. I mean, in other words, we have to push back with every tool we have. And so I admire their purity. But let's say in the case of, let's talk briefly about that concept. The And Beyond, the CEO of And Beyond, when they were partnering with us in 2008, 2009, to expand into Latin America, I went and looked at their lodges, and I went and told him, wow, that was so beautiful, it's so wonderful. Why don't you have any feeding of sunbirds, which are like, you know what they are, sunbirds near the pool in your fancy resorts during the middle of the day in bright shade, and the people that can afford to pay your exorbitant prices. One of them might want to be a photographer. They could be taking pictures of sunbirds, beautiful pictures of sunbirds. Oh, we don't feed any wildlife at any of our lodges, he said. Oh, okay, I understand. At your 47 lodges in 7 countries, they don't feed any wildlife. But I said, I don't understand, Steve. What about the 3-acre pond you made with the giant bulldozer that has 20 elephants and 30 buffalo and giraffes and hippos, all those things? Well, especially the first one's eating all the dry season vegetation because you supply them with water. Isn't that a water feeder? And he looked at me and slapped his forehead like that, and then looked at the table. Said, wait. To his credit, after 30 seconds, he said, God damn it, you're right. I never thought of that. So I'm not trying to cause trouble, Steve. I just don't understand your holier than thou thing about not feeding anything when you have giant water feeders in all of your places. And these animals are eating the dry season vegetation. What's the impact on that vegetation? They wouldn't even be there eating it if you didn't supply them with water. You should study that. And he was a little upset by this, and he actually changed the policy of the entire company after a series of conversations like this. So my answer would be, yeah, maybe. I mean, tourism in the Pantanal has not saved enough property yet. Tourism in the Amazon has barely scratched the surface, and a lot of things in the Amazon you're not going to see if you don't use all the techniques you have, whether it's calling or some snacks or something. You're simply not going to see the animals well enough to move the needle.
Okay, so I think that's it for the questions in chat. Anyone else want to ask any questions before we let Charlie get back to his work up there in Connecticut? All right, thank you very much, Charlie. That was great.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the suggestions. I'm going to get back to you guys.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Good charge.
You didn't say